We're going to start off now with Jasmine Sussex. And Jasmine Sussex is a feminist, a breastfeeding advocate, and a mother of 3. And the title of Jasmine's talk is Mother of All Battles, When Men Claim Breastfeeding as Their Own. So thank you so much, Jasmine, for coming, and over to you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a joy to be here on International Women's Day. And I'm coming to you from Melbourne, which is the land of the Wurundjeri people. And I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm on here today, their elders past, present and emerging. And as it is International Women's Day, I'd like to pay particular respects to all the mothers, nanas, aunties, sisters, daughters, who've been birthing on this country since time began. And in that vein, I'd like to pay my respects to my mother, who you can see here on the screen, and her mother, and my daughter here, who's now 20. This is when she was 1 week old. So my favourite quote to help us understand the radical changes that we've seen in policy and law is from one of your excellent lawyers over there in the UK, Peter Daly. And obviously he's one of Mayor Forstater's lawyers. And he said that transgenderism causes institutional insanity. And this is definitely my experience with the Australian Breastfeeding Association. I am currently defending, as Jo said, a vilification claim about male breastfeeding. My public statements on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube about the ethics of male breastfeeding have resulted in a complaint being lodged against me. And I received notification in November 2023 from the Queensland Human Rights Commission, which is actually the other end of the country. I live in Victoria, who was advised that they were investigating a complaint against me. So my mission for today is to try and explain what's happening in the world of universal lactation activism, and how sex realists like myself, a breastfeeding counsellor or a former breastfeeding counsellor, are trying to hold the line. So in February 2020, it all kicked off at a breastfeeding conference, and I stumbled into a conversation with a young breastfeeding counsellor who was talking about being at the Children's Gender Clinic here in Melbourne earlier that day, and was looking actively at socially transitioning her 4-year-old daughter. Because of the case that I'm in, the vilification case, there are some things that I'm constrained in what I can say. But I just wanted to explain very briefly that conversation with the young counsellor resulted in me being reported to the Australian Breastfeeding Association for my view, which she also saw as vilification, that, you know, children cannot be born in the wrong body, and they certainly shouldn't be told that they can. So that was my first strike. And then later, the following year, in July 2021, I was sacked as a breastfeeding counsellor. So in November 2020, the inclusive language consultation came to the Australian Breastfeeding Association, and you know, it had been kicked off in most other breastfeeding charities around the world before that. We were sort of the last to go. And although the trans activists and allies within the ABA actually didn't manage to get their language change agenda across the line, they did manage to purge the ABA of the more vocal sex realist counsellors like myself. And we argued that dehumanising language like chest feeding parents and pregnant parents and chest feeding were really not acceptable, and as a result we were subject to mass complaints from the kind of inclusive parents brigade within the ABA. So I just want to take half a second to acknowledge those breastfeeding counsellors or mother supporters or group leaders, as they call them, in Leslie, who have had the same thing happen to them. You know, like Ruth Lewis in Leslie UK, and Marion Thompson in Leslie USA, who obviously is one of the founders of Leslie internationally, and she's amazing. And it's been really, you know, sad, but really good to see that. Well, not good to see, but in a way, the same thing has happened to all these amazing women around the world that happened to us back in 2021. And there's a solidarity in that, which is sort of surprisingly positive. So, and in Australia, there were 6 other counsellors who were sacked by the ABA, and they weren't, for professional reasons, able to be public with their identities, but I just wanted to pay my respects to them as well. So how did we manage to defeat chest feeding in Australia? You know, like most mothers who have used cloth nappies, you know, we know that sunshine is the best disinfectant and stain remover for that matter. And we really applied that kind of mum know-how to the takeover that was happening in the Breastfeeding Association, and got the media involved in reporting what was going on. So ironically, although I am the main whistleblower that's quoted in this story, if it wasn't for a fellow breastfeeding counsellor who's also a noted sex realist language academic in Australia, who's also quoted in this story, it never would have got up. And that's because the journalist that wrote this story, Bernard Lane, is a stickler for primary source journalism, and he didn't want to publish the story until this book here, the Breastfeeding, Chest Feeding and Human Milk Feeding book, was published. So I received a call from Professor Carleen Gribble around this time, who was actually really kind to me through the complaint process. And she explained that Bernard Lane was sniffing around about the guide. And she told me that the story was triggered by Rainbow Families, which were the partners with the ABA in producing this book. And Rainbow Families had really jumped the gun and released this horrendous photo to try and promote some breastfeeding education classes that ABA was running with Rainbow Families to release this book. And obviously you can see, you know, we've got a mother who's had her breasts removed here playing with her baby. And this photo really still brings me out in a rage rash. And I just still can't really believe that the ABA, which, you know, at its heart is really still a bastion of mumsy sensibleness, could ever work with these people. So my focus with the ABA was really all about not lending credibility to organisations like Rainbow Families, which encourages self-harming, dysphoric teenage girls to have their breasts removed. And, you know, of course, this means that they're never going to breastfeed their babies. So it was only after the Australian story was published that I really realised that the ABA was also welcoming men to breastfeeding in the name of inclusion. And this here is in May 2021, 12th of May 2021, when I became aware of the issue, as men were really carpet bombing ABA's Facebook page with these self-congratulatory comments about being able to induce breast milk with domperidone. So I responded, and I called the ABA's attention to the complainant's presence. And honestly, I did genuinely expect that the ABA would be honest and protect its counsellors and explain that its counsellors are not in any way expected to help men to induce lactation and sabotage the mother-baby breastfeeding relationship. But I was sorely disappointed, and instead my comment was deleted very rapidly, and I was blocked from the national Facebook page, still am blocked. And I received notification that my comment was going to be added to my rap sheet for investigation. So I next became aware that I was being targeted in March 2023, and it was around this time that a woman in Queensland and I both received notification from Twitter that the Australian government had been in touch to advise that our tweets broke Australian laws. And it later turned out that eSafety had submitted informal complaints, which have recently been argued are in fact arguably unlawful to Twitter, because they implied that our tweets reached the threshold of adult cyber abuse, which they didn't actually investigate if they had or they hadn't. So anyway, in February 2023, we attempted to conciliate the disagreement about what constitutes appropriate care for a newborn at the Queensland Human Rights Commission. And unfortunately, the conciliation was unsuccessful, and the matter was escalated to QCAT, which is our civil administrative tribunal, but it's in Queensland and I'm in Victoria. And this reporter, Carly Douglas, she works at the Herald Sun, which is the tabloid paper in my hometown. And I did speak to her about this story, but she did her own research as well. So, and I do actually remain none the wiser as to what it is that I said that was inaccurate about male breastfeeding being, as I say, an unethical experiment on newborns, which inevitably sabotages the mother-baby relationship. So I firmly believe that babies have a human right to his or her mother's milk, and that any competing milk source inevitably, as I think I've said a few times, sabotages the mother-baby relationship. And the fact is, men just don't have the physiology or the endocrinology to make anything more than a starvation quantity of an unstudied substance. And I believe that it's unethical for endocrinologists to conduct human milk experiments on unconsenting babies and their mothers. And particularly as it seems clear, and many of the endocrinologists concede that they're doing so to provide their male patients with gender ego gratification. So for these reasons and many more, I say that men shouldn't try to breastfeed. Thanks.